Apple dominates the smartwatch market. More Apple Watches were sold last year than all their competitors combined. Revenue just from their watch business was estimated to be $20 billion. You might know all this already, but what you probably didn't know is that when the Apple Watch was first launched, it was actually considered a complete flop. At the time, a rival had already cornered the market. That company should have had the dominant smartwatch of today. In this video, we'll dive into the tech moves Apple made, not just to overcome the odds, but to absolutely decimate their competition. Plus, we'll look at the unreleased tech upgrades that they're working on now. Upgrades that, well, if you think Apple's dominant now, just wait until you see what they've got planned. In 2024, Apple CEO Tim Cook made a bold claim. Apple's greatest contribution to mankind will be to health. Kind of a weird thing to say for the head of a consumer electronics company. But to understand why he said that, we actually need to rewind to a time before Apple was the dominant smartwatch, when they were actually losing. The concept of a smartwatch had been around for decades, but they really began to take shape in the early 2000s. Microsoft's Spotwatch, released in 2004, delivered news and weather via FM radio, and Sony Ericsson's MW4150 from 2007 could control your phone's music. Those were big advances for the time, but they were more of cool watch features than breakthroughs. But all that changed in 2012. A tiny startup called Pebble launched a smartwatch on Kickstarter and raised over $10 million. That proved that there was real demand, and immediately after that, the big players woke up. Samsung jumped in, Google launched Android Wear, and in 2014, Apple entered the race with a product that no one expected. Not the iWatch, but simply the Apple Watch. But they were stepping on somebody else's turf. At the time, one company had their watches on everybody's wrists. I wouldn't call Fitbit a tech giant. It sold simple fitness trackers, step counters, heart rate monitors, band-style wearables, but at the time, they were everywhere. In 2015, Fitbit sold over 21 million devices. And unlike Apple's usual playbook, where a shiny new product crushes the competition, the Apple Watch flopped. Early reviews were confused. What is this even for? Was it a fitness band, a fashion accessory, a tiny phone? Even Apple didn't really seem to know. At launch, they sold 35,000 watches a day, but by summer that dropped to just 5,000 a day. And that's when Apple realized that their current strategy couldn't beat Fitbit. So behind the scenes, they decided to make a huge pivot. In its early days, Apple had a split focus. The Apple Watch was pitched as both a fashion statement and a functional device. It came in gold, stainless steel, and even luxury editions that cost more than a MacBook. Personally, I really doubt most people bought a Fitbit because it looked cool. They bought one because it helped them move more and get healthier. And that strategy really worked for Fitbit. Until it didn't. Around 2016 and 2017, the smartwatch category hit a turning point. Health sensors had improved, GPS became standard, waterproofing enabled swim tracking. Smartwatches were no longer just for notifications and step counting, they became personal health monitors. And Apple capitalized on an opportunity that Fitbit simply missed. Quietly, Apple moved away from its original positioning. They dropped the fashion-first narrative and leaned into fitness, wellness, and health. The Series 3 tracked heart rate continuously, alerting users to dangerous highs and lows. A year later, the Series 4 raised the bar entirely, with FDA-cleared ECG readings, fall detection, and irregular rhythm notifications that push the watch into medical-grade territory. I mean, if you're health conscious, are you gonna get a watch that can only track your steps, or one that can track your steps and give you a pretty comprehensive picture of your overall health? Tim Cook later said that once people understood that the watch could efficiently track their health and fitness, demand spiked. Meanwhile, Fitbit fell into the trap that many top companies fall into. It's called the innovator's dilemma. When a company succeeds by doing one thing well, it can be blind to how the market is evolving. Fitbit had built its brand around simple, focused wearables. And when the market moved toward more complex, multifunctional health tech, Fitbit didn't adapt fast enough, because adapting would have meant letting go of the very simplicity that made them so successful in the first place. In 2017, they launched the Iconic and the more successful Versa in 2018. Later, they added features like blood oxygen sensors and even an ECG with the Fitbit Sense. But at this point, they were reacting, not leading. And Fitbit's core buyers, those that just wanted a basic fitness tracker, began to upgrade. By 2018, their shipments were declining 20 to 30% year over year, and their stock had fallen over 80% from its peak. In the end, Google bought Fitbit for $2.1 billion, a price that felt less like a win and more like a rescue. Apple, for its part, took the lead in the smartwatch race and has continued to grow each year, which ironically should have made them vulnerable to the innovator's dilemma. But what they're planning next might actually put their competition 6 feet under the ground. The next frontier in smartwatch technology is often described as the holy grail of health tracking, non-invasive monitoring of critical biomarkers. In English, that's knowing about your health without needles or invasive procedures. For years, rumors have swirled that Apple's been working on one in particular, blood glucose, a way to measure blood sugar without pricking a finger or wearing a patch. If it works, it could be life-changing for people with diabetes. In early 2023, reports emerged that Apple had reached a proof of concept using a silicone photonics chip, a tiny laser that shines through the skin to detect glucose levels. It's not a consumer device yet, but the fact that it even exists will put the rest of the smartwatch industry on edge. And glucose monitoring isn't their only bet. Apple's also working on blood pressure monitoring. And that's significant because more than 120 million people in the US alone have high blood pressure. Other watches actually technically offer this already, but with bulky workarounds. Bloomberg reported that Apple hopes to include it in its version soon, not to replace traditional readings, but to detect trends, to warn you when your pressure is creeping up long before you would actually notice. If Apple succeeds at even one of these, and there's a chance that they're gonna nail both, the watch moves from nice to have to a medical necessity for millions. And that's a nightmare scenario for the competitors. If it becomes a medical necessity, then it might be something your doctor recommends or your insurance maybe covers. Probably not, but it'd be nice. Tim Cook has said that Apple's health efforts are just getting started, that the company's greatest contribution to humanity might not be the Mac, the iPhone, or even the watch, but what those devices let us understand about our own health. And if he's right, if the watch does become a tool, not just for counting steps and rings, but for catching real medical issues before they escalate, then Apple will have reduced their smartwatch rivals to a forgotten chapter in tech history. If you found this video interesting and you'd like to see more on corporate tech, please consider subscribing. This is Tyler Dutchover. Thanks for watching.